100 years ago, Americans could travel without a passport, and we didn't have to show an ID when buying beer or checking into a hotel. Taxes were low and business relatively unregulated. America became prosperous because of that. Without a minimum wage, workers at Ford Motor Company saw their wages more than double. 100 years later, we have 1 million regulations, all communications tapped, and it seems like everything is either prohibited or mandated. Do we live in a police state? Is Big Brother here?
I don't know, but I'm here along with several thousand people. We're about to argue about whether Big Brother's here and what to do about it. That's our show tonight.
And now, John Stossel.
Tonight, we're in Las Vegas for a special edition of our show. I'm joined by almost 2,000 people who care enough about liberty to come here to a conference called Freedom Fest, billed as the world's largest gathering of free minds. And this year, Freedom Fest's topic is Big Brother. The phrase comes from George Orwell's 1984, a novel about a totalitarian future where people are watched constantly and government reminds people Big Brother is watching to scare people who might oppose the regime. So is that America today? Well, this group says that. And yes, say people from Tea Party groups like Matt Kibbe of Freedom Works and Jenny Beth Martin of Tea Party Patriots. But before we talk to you about that, let's talk about another way some say government controls us, by manipulating our money. And you say that's a form of Big Brother. Steve Forbes of Forbes magazine. What do you mean?
Well, money is a measure of value. And when the government manipulates it, it picks winners and losers. It hurts the economy. John, since we've gone off the gold standard, our growth rates have fallen. We'd be 50% larger today. And
but what do you mean by manipulate it? They're not manipulating. They want to keep it stable.
Stable? They keep changing the value. You have 60 minutes an hour. Imagine if the Fed did to the clock what they do to the dollar, the Federal Reserve. You have 60 minutes an hour one day, 48 minutes the next, 22 the next. It'd be chaotic. Imagine if you bake a cake. It says bake the batter 45 minutes. Now, is that nominal minutes, inflation-adjusted minutes?
And they do this by printing more money, buying bonds.
Buying bonds in other ways. The head of the Federal Reserve went before the Senate and said she wants 2% inflation, which will cost the typical American family $1,000 extra each year, and not one senator asked her that. Where did you get the authority to levy a $1,000 tax on the American people?
People on the left, you have your supporters here. People on the left say 2% inflation is pretty good, and we need to have this to goose the economy, to end unemployment.
It hurts the economy.
But are they all stupid? They all went to fancy schools.
Well, they once thought that the sun revolved around the earth, and some of them are still at universities today, only in the economics department.
You would have no Fed, but the data I have here shows that before the Fed, there were 9 recessions in the 30 years right before. 30 years after, 6 recessions, fewer. The last 30 years, 3 recessions. So maybe they're doing something right.
No, John. They look back and always say everything's a recession. You don't have stable money, you don't invest in the future, and we all pay the price for it.
Gold is just a metal. Why pick this for value?
Because better than anything else, and this is 4,000 years of experience, and I'll take over that over Washington politicians listening to flat earthers, but in terms of intrinsic value, gold keeps its intrinsic value better than anything else. Money just represents what people produce in the marketplace. That's why counterfeiting is illegal, because it's a form of stealing. If in the private sector you do it, counterfeiting, you go to jail. In the government, they call it stimulus.
So a lot of people here are worried about massive inflation. I'm worried about it too. And so they buy gold, I bet. How many of you have bought gold? This is an unusual audience. I'd say most of you put your hands up. So, I mean, how do people buy it? I have some with me. They sell things like, this is a 1-ounce coin. It's $1,300. And the advantage of these things is what? That if there's massive inflation and it costs $5,000 to buy a loaf of bread, the baker will know the value of this and will honor this.
Gold always survives politicians. And that's why it's not so much an investment, John, but a form of insurance against malpractice, economic malpractice by our authorities.
Some of you have also bought silver like this. This is $200 worth. The other part of the nanny state, you two are from the Tea Party. You got picked on by the IRS. That's certainly Big Brother.
They held up our nonprofit status for our tax application. And
because the rule is you're not supposed to be too closely aligned with politicians, and it's complex.
Well, it's a rule that's been in place since like 1957, I believe. All of a sudden in 2010, they had trouble understanding what that rule meant.
And Tea Party groups were checked out at a rate 10 times other groups.
The Inspector General for the Treasury Department said that conservative groups were targeted 100%. 100%. So the Inspector General has said that.
And what targeted means is not just show us your paperwork. It was show us this and then show us that and again and again.
Show us, they asked lots of questions.
What was on your Facebook page? What's the password? Every speech you gave. And
speeches, not just speeches that I gave, but speeches of the people that we had who attended, who came and spoke at our events. And after that, there are many people around the country who are afraid to speak out because they're afraid to be associated with us and may get audited.
And you would answer the questions, and then they would come back with 100 more questions.
They'd come back with more questions, and they would delay and delay and delay as they were waiting to ask the questions.
You clearly are doing something right. You have 1.3 million Facebook fans.
Yes.
And Matt, you wrote a book titled "Don't Hurt People," which is a pretty good title. What's your point?
My point is that the values of liberty that unite all of us are quite simple. It's what your mom taught you. She probably stole it from her mom. Don't hurt people. Don't take their stuff. Take responsibility for your own actions. This is the basic rules that apply to everybody that subscribes to the ideas of liberty. The difference between us and them is that you don't know what their agenda is, but you know that they have the ability to target you because you might hurt them. That's what's so scary about what's going on today. It's a rule of man instead of the rule of law. And our argument is quite simple. We should treat everybody just like everybody else.
And clarify that. Rule of man versus rule of law. A lot of people would say, well, I'd like someone to make a judgment. That rule of man sounds more adjustable than rule of law.
2 words, Lois Lerner.
We got... And our letters were signed by Lois Lerner, and our emails mysteriously disappeared.
Now, a lot of Americans want anonymous bureaucrats to act because some people want to kill us. And so the NSA gathers data and says it's protecting us from terrorists. What's your problem with that?
Lindsey Graham, of course, says that this is perfectly fine because he says if you're doing nothing wrong, you have nothing to hide. Well,
this is the Republican senator from South Carolina.
Sort of a Republican, yeah.
If you're doing nothing wrong, you have nothing to hide. A lot of Americans would agree with that.
Of course, the principle of justice is innocent until proven guilty. They have targeted every single American that has made a phone call since 2006. They got your data, they got your stuff, and we know from what we've seen that the NSA is just like the IRS. They're not using it to protect us, they're using it to target certain people with agendas. They've gone after old girlfriends, they've gone after old boyfriends, and if they'll do it to them, why wouldn't they do it to us?
They have done it to some, mostly old girlfriends, I think. They even had a name for it, Love Int, when they caught the people checking up. I just wanted to see where she was, they would say. But how have they really gotten us? They haven't locked people up. The Washington Post says some attacks were prevented.
It's not what they have done, it's what they can do. And and Lois Lerner has proven the point that you can't trust anybody. Nobody's good enough, nobody's smart enough, nobody's virtuous enough to have all of this discretionary power over the rights of Americans.
All right, let's talk about the big brother parts where we may not agree. And Steve, I really admire what you've done. You fought for economic freedom. But on some social issues, I think you're big brother because...
That's what my daughters say, but, you know.
Well, you're supposed to be an authority to your kids. That's different. But you don't want me to have the right to kill myself if I'm old and sick? You don't think people should have a right to assisted suicide?
Doctors are supposed to save lives, not kill lives. And
isn't that police state too? It's my life. It should be my choice, I say. How about, all right. Illegal drugs. It's my body. Don't I own it? Can't I take what I want?
even with liquor, you have certain ages, you have certain rules. Because you have certain ages, you may not make the right decision.
All right, at age 21, I can have heroin?
No, because heroin is one of those drugs, and when you take it, it is unmerciful. Smoking, booze, you take it, you can usually get over it. Girlfriends, you can usually get over them. But heroin is an easily addictive drug, so therefore, real rules have to be needed.
Do you agree? Rules against heroin? Most say no. What about you, Tea Party?
Oh, I think you should be free to do what you want as long as you don't hurt people or take their stuff.
Steve, should I be able to burn a flag?
You want to burn a flag? Go ahead.
Should gays be allowed to marry the way straights are?
Well, if you want to do it, go ahead, you know.
All right, we have some areas of agreement.
But on a lot of these issues, John, like money, they try to shroud it in a lot of complexity. Money measures value. You understand that, you realize the Fed, most of it can go. And
Steve has a new book out on that called Money. Thank you, Steve Forbes, Jenny, and Matt. What do you think? Does government go too far? Does maybe Big Brother keeps us safer? Tell us on Twitter, use that hashtag FreedomFest. And coming up, I'm going to go after the hypocrisy of some of my friends here in Las Vegas. More from Freedom Fest when we come back. I noticed that in this big audience here at Freedom Fest, it's mostly men. Yeah, it's mostly men, and it's an older crowd. People, come on, most of you are my age. Is there something about liberty that's more interesting to men and to us older people? Maybe. I didn't become a libertarian until I was almost 40. How many of you here are under 40? Really? Come on. I'm glad some young people see the importance of liberty and the threat of Big Brother, and Emily Eakins says there will be more. So you're taking polls now for Reason. You've conducted some polls that you say bring good news?
I would say the good news is that, for one, millennial support for big government has been overblown.
Millennial. How many of you even know this word millennial that all these experts use? Okay, you know it.
Yeah, so who are millennials? So typically, we mean 18 to 29, 18 to 30, that age range. And honestly, their support for big government has just been overblown in recent years.
But in your poll, you asked people, do you want large government? Let me ask you, how many of you want large government? You asked this young group, do you want large government? And what do they say? Most say yes, right?
Yes. A majority of young people, they're the only cohort that says They would prefer to have a larger government and more services. We decided to ask another question. We asked, would you rather have a larger government offering more services and high taxes, or a smaller government with fewer services and low taxes? So the difference is, we mentioned taxes. Guess what happens? Support flips. And then a majority want a smaller government with fewer services and low taxes.
So are young people stupid that they don't realize a big government probably means much higher taxes?
What we see is that this cohort doesn't know exactly what we mean when we say big government. It's not really an effective phrase, because clearly they're not connecting taxes with the phrase big government.
The other thing you found is that young people are less affiliated with Republicans or Democrats than they used to be.
Absolutely true. They're 3 times as likely to say that they're independents, half as likely to be Republicans, no more likely to say they're Democratic, which is surprising given their Democratic voting behavior over the past few elections.
And I was a little surprised the Democrats win on budget deficit. More of these kids thought the Democrats would address the budget deficit. Taxes, more of them thought that 34% Democrats, 22% Republicans.
Think about the context here. A lot of young people came of a politically impressionable age during the Bush administration or right afterward. And Republicans in Congress and the Bush administration oversaw massive increases in government spending. Republicans have lost credibility on this issue. And if you care a lot about social tolerance, which young people do, 62% say they're socially liberal, who do you pick? You pick the party who you feel cares more about social tolerance and individual rights, because neither party is going to be good on spending.
And the young people really care about social tolerance.
That's true. This is something that really distinguishes them from older cohorts. We see that they're social liberals and fiscal centrists.
When you ask them on fiscal issues, which is better, capitalism or socialism? Capitalism wins 52% to 42%. 42% prefer socialism?
That surprises a lot of people.
Yeah.
But there's something going on here.
Don't they notice the Soviet Union, Cuba,
no,
Venezuela?
They don't. They don't, because a lot of
the motor vehicles department?
The Cold War was over by the time those young people were paying attention.
They don't know what socialism is.
They don't know what socialism means. There was
actually sound like social caring.
Yes, a lot of people think it's about caring for the vulnerable. However, when you're more specific in the words that you use, you're more precise. Would you rather have a free market economy or an economy managed by the government? People, or young people, favor a free market 64% to 32%.
So I should stop saying capitalism and should start talking about free markets.
Yes, apparently.
And also good news, 58% say government agencies generally abuse power.
The word generally is astounding here. We're not talking about occasionally or once in a while, but generally is astounding.
And 2/3 don't trust regulators.
That's true. We found 63% say that government regulators, when they write and enforce regulations, favor special interests over the public.
But they want the regulations. They want the environment made pristine and global warming stopped and everything made safe.
Right. I think it's the ultimate dilemma in American politics.
Let me ask you, should there be any regulations? No. Come on, none? No. 5 years ago, Pew asked, when something's run by the government, is it usually efficient? 42% agreed. This year, you asked the same question 5 years later.
66%. So we asked this question using the exact same wording that was used in 2009, and we find that there has been a surge in this perception that government is wasteful, and actually now millennials reflect older Americans on this issue.
So maybe they're waking up. Thank you, Emily. Next, more from Freedom Fest on Big Brother and the nanny state. Yeah.
People think that we live in a free market society, and we don't. We have cronyism, we don't have capitalism.
People are getting put in jail in the U.S. all the time for nothing, victimless crimes.
The idea that government should make our choices for us is one that a lot of people prefer.
Those are clips from a new movie about the American nanny state, which will be released tomorrow. The guy who made it is Tim Del Mastro. What's your point? Freedom from choice.
Yeah, I guess I came up with that title because I would have thought that most people actually want the freedom of choice, whether it be,
I do.
Yeah, I mean, everyone, you would think that everyone does, but then when you actually look into it, most people would actually prefer the freedom from making choices and the freedom from making important decisions in their life. So I thought the title, Freedom from Choice, was quite an adequate one for my film.
And someone in the movie says the idea that government should make our choices for us is one that a lot of people prefer?
Yeah, well, if you want to be a completely independent, sovereign person, then really you need to have some level of responsibility. You need to be responsible for your own life, your own decisions, your own actions. And that's something that's quite daunting for a lot of people. So most people would actually prefer just to allow the government to make their choices for them.
Because government cares about all of us and will make sure we're safe and we don't pollute and we don't hurt other people.
In theory, it makes a lot of sense for the government to do all this stuff for us. What happens is that power gets abused.
Let's take a couple areas you cover in your film. Finances. Most Americans, I assume, want the government to protect their deposits in a bank.
Yeah, but what happens when the government guarantees our mortgages or our deposits is that the banks can then go ahead and do all kinds of things with our money. They can, invest in speculative things on Wall Street. Some investments leverage over 100 to 1. And then at the end of it, if they lose the money, then the government makes them whole anyway. They get bailed out.
Most Americans support the FDA. An agency that makes sure all drugs are safe and effective before you take them.
Yeah,
why are you groaning? Don't you want safe and effective drugs?
Yeah, I mean, again, in theory, it makes a lot of sense to have the government overseeing everything, but Vioxx was an anti-inflammatory drug that was created by Merck, and that drug was left on the market for years, even though it killed 60,000 people, and it caused like 140,000 heart attacks or something like that. And it was left on the market for years because the FDA kept approving it.
Let me ask the audience, should any greedy drug company be allowed to just sell any pill without government approval? Now, you may have noticed his accent. Tim, you're from Australia, right?
Correct. My dad's from the US, but I live in Australia now.
So why are you picking on America? Because Australia is bad. The Sydney Morning Herald, Australia, the great nanny state. Australia forces people to vote. It's not your choice. You must vote. They banned R-rated video games. You get a fine if you bike without a helmet.
Yeah, this is true. I'm not going to defend that Australia is a nanny state, because it is. But I wanted to focus the film in the US because, I mean, look, let's face it, the nanny state...
In Australia, you can't buy a round of drinks at the pub after midnight?
That's not true. I do that all the time.
Okay, we read that somewhere. In Australia, you have to lock your car in parts of Australia if you're more than 3 meters from it, and the windows must not be wound down more than 5 centimeters?
Something like that, yeah, I've heard that.
Because the police, the state has an investment in preventing crime.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. So basically, if you want to leave your car unlocked and just take the risk, you're not allowed to do that. That's a crime now. But you know, I wanted to focus on the US because there are nanny state countries all over the world. I mean, and in history too, the Soviet Union being a classic example. But in a country like the US, where it was founded on the principles of freedom, individual liberty, of self-reliance, when a country like that turns to the nanny state, or moves towards the nanny state, I think it's worth making a film about that.
Thank you, Tim. Coming up, do you think that President Obama acts like he's president or like he's a king? We debate the imperial presidency next. Thanks. We're back at Freedom Fest in Las Vegas with 2,000 people who worry about big brother, big government. The founders of America feared big government too, and that's why we have checks and balances, the Constitution. This is it. And the Declaration of Independence, pretty small, but it limits what a president can do. Congress was given most of the power, and the Supreme Court has the right to say, no, that's unconstitutional if it's not in here. So it's good that we have this thing, and we all should have our little copies. Please enjoy here. But politicians don't like these limits on their power. When Congress doesn't do what President Obama wants, he sometimes just does it anyway using what he calls executive power. He did that when he swapped the 5 Taliban prisoners for Sergeant Bergdahl, when he intervened in Libya, when he delayed certain parts of Obamacare. This is not right, and we're going to stop him, say Tim and Christina Sandifer. They're lawyers for free market think tanks. Tim is at the Pacific Legal Foundation. Christina is with the Goldwater Institute. How are you going to stop them?
Well, John, you know, we are going to sue him. And in fact, we both have lawsuits that are challenging various aspects of Obamacare right now.
The family that sues the president together sticks together.
You guys just got married, but your think tank is in Sacramento, California. Yours is in Phoenix.
Right.
But
we live together more often than Bill and Hillary Clinton do, so.
What's the worst offense against the Constitution that this administration's done?
If I had to name just one thing, it would be Obamacare. The president's signature achievement that he says he's proudest of is the largest single assault on the Constitution that the president has overseen. And in particular, the reason why is because, you know, we're talking about Big Brother. One of the principal distinctions between a free society and the Big Brother society is that in a free society, the law prohibits you from doing things that are bad. Whereas in a Big Brother society, the law tries to force you to do things that political leaders think is good. And with things like the individual mandate, Obamacare crosses that line and tries to force us to do what political elites think we ought to do.
And Christina, the worst part of Obamacare?
That would be the Independent Payment Advisory Board, or IPAB. This is a group of appointed experts that are supposed to control Medicare costs, but the way they do this, John, is by enacting law unilaterally without vote of Congress, without signature of the president, without even review by the courts.
You mentioned the release of the Taliban detainees. In that case, Congress had passed a law to regulate the military. You pointed to the Constitution. The Constitution says the president's the commander-in-chief, but Congress sets the rules for the military forces. And they did that by limiting the conditions on which the president can release people from Guantanamo.
But he just doesn't.
And he just did it. In clear violation. In fact, he admits that it violated the law. He just says that he's allowed to do that because he's the commander-in-chief, ignoring the fact that Congress has the explicit constitutional authority to limit what he does as commander-in-chief.
And granting 10 states waivers on No Child Left Behind, changing the Obamacare law when it wasn't working out. He's just executive power.
And the problem is that when you have no respect for the rule of law, then what we get is utter unpredictability. We don't know how the law is going to be enforced. We don't know how to behave. And we don't know if one day what we're doing is legal and the next day it's illegal.
Is he the worst in terms of executive orders? Do you have an opinion? Mixed there. Abraham Lincoln actually issued 48. President Obama so far 182. Is that the most of any president? Informed audience. George Bush 290. Eisenhower 480. Teddy Roosevelt more than 1,000. Includes one that demanded on all government documents KIST should be spelled K-I-S-T, and enough, E-N-U-F. I guess they were saving words, saving letters. Congress, in that case, did muster a 2/3 majority to override that one. But the point, I guess, Tim, Obama's not the worst.
That's true. And, you know, the numbers aren't really what's important. It's the content of these orders. Because the president, when he issues these orders, for instance, in the Obamacare waivers, the president is not changing the law when he issues those orders. What he's doing is he's saying, I'm not going to enforce the law. I'm going to look the other way while the law, that, by the way, is named after me and that I advocated for and think is a great idea, I'm going to look the other way while it's violated for the next year or 6 months or whatever. And that causes as many problems as it fixes because, you know, insurers and people who have insurance are going to have disputes and courts are going to have to decide whether they're legal or not. I mean, that's a real problem.
Can you imagine if President Romney had been elected and he had come in and said, you know, I don't like Obamacare, I'm not going to enforce it? It would be an utter outrage. But yeah, that's exactly what this president is doing here.
So thank you both for living a part to enforce the Constitution. There's one more for you. Tim and Christina, thank you. Coming up, my take on one of the sleazier parts of Las Vegas. But next, what if Big Brother gave all Americans, well, I ask you, a one-year vacation from the income tax? Would that be a good idea? Really? We'll debate that when we come back. Thank you. Yeah. We're back with more from Freedom Fest in Las Vegas. Now, this group criticizes Big Brother, but is government really so bad? The Labor Department says under President Obama last month, 288,000 jobs were created. And when I interview people in Times Square, they tell me, we want government to create jobs. They think government does that. And the president says his programs will help America's middle class. But radio host Wayne Allen Root says the president and Big Brother are murdering the middle class. That's the title of his new book. Wayne, what do you mean? The middle class are doing pretty well by historical standards.
They're doing horrible by every standard. You mentioned 288,000 new jobs last month. There's 92 million Americans, actually over 92 million working age Americans who are no longer working, which fits almost exactly with the over 100 million Americans on entitlements. The Obama economy is about food stamps and about disability and about unemployment and about welfare and about housing allowances. It's not about work anymore. 520,000 full-time jobs were murdered last month, lost, gone forever. Does anyone out there think that's a good number? No. Murder of the middle class.
Well, wait a second. Murder of jobs? I go along with
murder of good middle-class jobs. There are no more middle-class lifestyles in America.
Well,
I believe it's a
garbage. Yeah, this cliche of the middle class that you commentators throw out, I hate it. The average disposable household income has increased across all groups since 1979. 40% for the middle quintile. Yes, Obama, big government of all kind. Regulation kills jobs. But the middle class is not the only people. Everybody's
John, if you look at the average American male in the last 40 years adjusted for inflation makes less money now than in 1968.
Wall Street Journal, average income up for the middle quintile.
John, all I can tell you is...
Things are getting better.
Listen,
it's free markets, overcoming government.
Number one.
You oversell it by saying murdering the middle class.
The amount of Americans who consider themselves middle class has gone down about 30% since Obama became president. Barack Obama can massage the numbers any way he wants. This audience knows that the government says there's no inflation and your grocery prices are dramatically up, your electric prices dramatically up, your gas prices for your car dramatically up, your health care premiums dramatically up, your taxes dramatically up. Every single thing about our lives is getting worse, not better. Am I correct?
No. We're living longer than ever, and we have all this new technology, and many lives are getting better.
Do you want to live longer in poverty? Because that's where we're heading.
We're richer than ever. You're distorting the numbers.
Listen, right now in Venezuela, there's a toilet paper shortage under the socialists. There's a food shortage.
We agree on Venezuela, but let's not oversell the food problems in America.
John, food shortage, toilet paper shortage, and the highest stock market in history. It's the exact same plan Barack Obama is using in America. You grab the money through the Fed, you print fake money, you sprinkle it on Wall Street, you make the richest donors in the world wealthy, so they're happy, and the corporate CEOs happy, and the stock market investors happy, while the middle class is getting murdered.
All right, your solution to this is an income tax holiday of 1 year.
Right. I think if
we're already in debt. How would we pay for the government?
Well, no one asked Obama how he would pay for that 2.3 trillion stimulus.
So because Obama did the wrong thing, we should do the wrong thing by collecting no taxes?
Jimmy Carter's economy looked exactly like this, and Ronald Reagan turned it around in 2 years by a radical, dramatic income tax cut from 70% to 28%. And what I'm proposing is a radical 1-year income tax vacation where the people bring the economy back. Let us keep our own money for 1 single year. It's our money.
You support this? Audience, yes? No?
Because government doesn't work, John. Government cannot get us out of this mess.
I agree with you
Only
there.
the people can.
Thank you, Wayne. Coming up, now that I'm here in Vegas, I'm upset about collusion between Big Brother and rich hypocrites in business here who are too eager to make friends with Big Brother. That's next. $2,000 people are here. Freedom Fest is held in Las Vegas because there are big hotels here with relatively cheap room rates. The costs are lower here because taxes are lower and because casino gambling is legal. But let me ask you, do you folks like being in Las Vegas for this? There is a lot to like about Vegas and Nevada.
Plan your adventure at travelnevada.com.
Nevada is a right-to-work state, and there is no income tax. People are free to carry concealed guns, to gamble in casinos, and in most of the state, to get paid for sex work. But Nevada is no libertarian haven. The state's private schools are the most regulated in America. Each must follow detailed government rules. Maybe that's why Nevada students get some of the worst SAT scores in the nation. The Mercatus Center ranks Nevada 20th on its list of freest states. Nevada does a little better when it comes to economic freedom. The Fraser Institute ranks it the 15th freest state. But as far as freedom to practice an occupation, Nevada is among the worst. Politicians here collude with their friends in business to limit competition. Do you want to teach someone how to apply makeup? Doing it without a government license can cost you $2,000 in fines. You can't start a moving company here unless you can prove to state bureaucrats that your company won't be detrimental to existing moving companies. But beating the competition is the point of competing. Government isn't supposed to protect cronies who are already in business. Big Brother is the theme of this conference, and I usually think of government as Big Brother. After all, only government can use force. It's important to remember that. But let's not forget that established businesses often encourage government to use force. It's not just the moving companies and union makeup artists. The established casinos do it too. It's great that Nevada allows Americans to gamble in casinos, better than banning it altogether. But now there's this new thing you may have heard of called the internet, and it does allow people to gamble anywhere. In Europe and Asia, this is a $36 billion business, but not in America. We lose that money. Here, it's mostly illegal, and a reason it is illegal is when politicians debate making it legal, voters see commercials like this one.
In the history of bad ideas, this has to be one of the worst. Internet gambling. This is gambling on your computer, your mobile phone, and your iPad. They target the young and the elderly, making it all look fun and easy until someone gets in over their head.
Ooh, you may get in over your head. And you might. It's a fair argument. Except the commercial is funded by the owners of casinos, like Sheldon Adelson and Steve Wynn. What hypocrisy! It pains me to say this about Steve Wynn because I'm told he's libertarian and a fan of this show, but Steve, really, I understand that internet gambling will compete with your casinos, but the answer is to ban it and fund ads like this?
Someone you know or love could be taken for thousands of dollars without ever having to step foot in a casino.
Please, like casinos are so wholesome? Yeah, it's easier to keep kids out, but children are parents' responsibility. Nevada has a long history of politicians colluding with their favorite tycoons. This state's most famous politician is Harry Reid. He's been wheeling and dealing with the casino money for years. While online gambling is illegal in America, online gambling on horse racing is legal. So Senator Reid introduced a bill that would ban taking bets on horse racing unless you have at least 500 gaming devices in one location. 500 devices. In other words, it has to be a casino. Harry doesn't want his buddies to have competition. How sleazy is that? So as we close this show celebrating liberty, let's remember that Big Brother often gets help from our friends in business. That's our show. Good night from Las Vegas.